I'm George Payne, and I'm going to be interviewing Robert Parker today, Robert Bob Parker. It's June 10th, 2015. So, Bob, state your full name. This is just like being in court.
Okay,
and,
sir.
And when you were born.
Well, it is like being in court, Judge. Judge Payne, Bob Parker, Robert E. Parker, and what was the other rest of the question, Jay?
And when were you born?
1943, July the 16th.
Okay. You were born in Shelbyville, is that correct?
Shelbyville, Tennessee, yes, sir.
Okay. What do you remember about growing up in Shelbyville?
Catfish fishing, squirrel hunting with my friends, close-knit community. It was a small community, and my dad was a banker, and I remember that I was brought up to get to know everybody and make a friend out of everybody that was willing to be a friend, and that was an important part of my growing up. I went to a segregated school. Schools were still segregated, but I don't remember any negative aspects of growing up in Shelbyville, although it was a small town.
Did your mother work?
She was a school teacher, but she was mother when I was the fourth of four children, and I don't know exactly when she quit teaching school and dedicated her time to the children and the family and church and the community.
How long had your family been in Shelbyville?
Long time. My granddad Lee, Robert Henry Lee, was the first dry goods merchant in Shelbyville. He was on a farm to begin with, owned a farm in Flat Creek, Tennessee, and then moved into town and opened a dry goods store. And my other granddad, Granddad Parker, was a lawyer before my birth, and then was clerk and master for about 26 years, and then his daughter, my aunt, was the clerk and master for 4 to 6 more years, so a little over 30 years.
And that was a very powerful political position back in those days, or a coveted position.
I was told that it was a lot better position than being a lawyer. And yes, it was a coveted position, I feel sure. Of course, I was young and just had the opportunity to grow in respect for both of my granddads. My granddad Lee lived to be 99 and a half and was a community asset. He was a storyteller, and even into his late 80s and early 90s, he was a regular at the junior high school and the elementary school, invited to tell stories to the kids, and he wrote stories.
This was your grandfather who was the lawyer?
No, it was my...
The dry goods
yes,
merchant. And how far from the square did you live?
4.5 blocks.
So would you visit your grandfather at the clerk and master's office, and did you sit in on trials? What do you remember about as when you were, even before high school, about the courthouse and what you were seeing there?
Very good question that I would like to answer, because I have great fond memories of that. I remember, having on shorts and being a little kid and going in, and my grandfather was generally in the trial room, sitting on the judge's bench reading law, and that's the memory I have. And
was he with the chancellor? Were they both on
that was where the chancellors tried the cases.
Okay.
And it was actually contiguous to his office, so you walk right through his office to that courtroom. But of course, he wasn't in there when they were trying cases. He did hear, as a special master, different cases, and sometimes I would just happened to be there. I don't remember going down to hear a particular case, but I had an image of what a judge does, you know, through my grandfather, and he was actually reading the law.
And of course, everybody knew you in Shelbyville. Shelbyville.
Chevel. It's Shelbyville, Tennessee, but it's Chevel to the folks that live there.
I was corrected by my courtroom deputy for many years on that point.
Yeah. Let's see. Tell me.
Well, everybody knew you, of course.
No. The reason I couldn't remember the answer to that because I don't know. It's a small town, and you want to know everybody, but it wasn't that small, and I'm sure I was a fairly insignificant citizen most of the time that I was in Shelbyville.
Do you remember any particular lawyers or judges? Because there were some fairly prominent lawyers who came out of that small town.
Mr. Bomer, his son practices there now, was Speaker of the House of Tennessee Legislature, and he was the most prominent and statewide known lawyer, and he was I said Secretary of State, but he was the congressional leader of the House. What's the designation for?
Speaker.
Speaker of the House. Thank you. He was Speaker of the House for many years, the second to the governor as far as political power and respect, I might say. And then Jim Burns, whose son I think is a real estate agent here in Nashville now, and you may ask me how I decided to be a lawyer, but one of the things I would tell you is that I was in church with my mother, and
how old were you at that point?
Oh golly, probably junior high school, maybe a freshman in high school, and the minister was preaching the sermon, and all of a sudden an alarm went off 3 or 4 rows in front of me, and I knew the Burns and the Burns family because they were always there, and what was that? You know, and then I saw Mr. Burns doing this with his watch, and after the service, I said, "Mother, what was that?" And she said, "Oh, he's a lawyer." And he has a watch with an alarm, so he gets places and where he's supposed to be on time, and he just had forgotten to turn it off. And that impressed me as a kid, you know, that a lawyer would have a watch with. So that was one of the things that that led me down the path of being interesting. And another one, you didn't ask the question, but another one that I remember was that after Sunday school one day, I was talking to Mr. Lawrence, who was the teacher, and in some sense, at least he understood, I was sort of arguing with him about whatever point he'd made and how you can prove that and know this, and he said, "Son, you ought to be a lawyer." And I never really knew whether he did it because that was a sincere thought and a respectful, I was hopefully trying to be respectful and asking my question, or whether he felt like I was argumentative, period, you know. But that stuck with me. And I guess my grandfather's vocation and my aunt's vocation all influenced.
Having a small town background, I suspect you were a Methodist or a Presbyterian?
I was a Methodist.
Okay.
Yeah.
I was going to say Methodist, but I thought I'd throw in. And I grew up on Tommy Wiseman's stories of practice in that area, and of course there were lots of Bomar stories.
Right.
Did you ever know Tommy Wiseman within the context of, he was in the adjacent county?
I did not.
Okay.
I certainly know him now and have for many years.
Yeah. So you went to your junior high and high school in Shelbyville. Did you play sports?
I did. I played all the sports We had a pretty good football team, and I played quarterback, and I was the weak link. I mean, the other three backs really were all very good, and so I got a little credit for the fact that we had a bowl season and so on. And the other interesting thing about that you never know, I never have known how to interpret it. I was, the highest award or honor was being mentioned, honorable mention, not one of the top, but honorable mention as a quarterback for the mid-state. And the only hooker to that is that my brother at that time was a writer for the Nashville Banner, and he was the one that covered. So it was his article.
Very good.
And so,
it always helps to have good press.
Well, except it always probably meant more if it had been somebody else.
It's interesting in retrospect that both the Banner and the Tennessean were, part and parcel of the mid-state reading agenda, and now I suspect they don't even go down there. I wonder if it's still a
The Tennessean certainly does. The Banner, of course, we don't have anymore, but my brother had the opportunity to work under Freddie Russell, who was editor of the sports editor of the Banner for a number of years. And
did he ever take you to meet Mr. Russell?
Oh, sure. I knew the whole family.
And he was a lawyer, as you know.
No, I didn't remember that.
Yeah.
I didn't remember that.
And he pulled some of his better pranks when he was in law school, Vanderbilt Law School, and he decided he could make better money as a writer than he could as a lawyer, as often people did back in the day. Did you come to Nashville at all?
Regularly.
Shop, or what? Tell me about that.
Okay. I came to Nashville quite a bit. The first injury I had that was serious was a little kid. I fell on the Harvey's escalators, which, there were no other escalators in town. And of course, Harvey's isn't around anymore. And then we came down to the Princess Theater to see movies. But as I grew older, older in elementary and junior high school, it was a regular trip because I had 3 siblings that went to Vanderbilt. And my brother played football for Vanderbilt. And, but it was really my sisters that my dad was partial to in a way. Every time we'd go down, we'd have to get a peck of apples, fresh apples. And I got the job of shining them, every one of them, and filling up the peck of apples to take to my sisters and their sorority houses. So, and then to go to the football game. And so I came to Nashville a lot.
Did your parents go to Vanderbilt or?
Neither.
Why did your brother went for athletic purposes, but what about your sisters?
Okay. My dad, I think that he was, and my mom, a school teacher, wanted all of their 4 children to have a good education. And I think that's what they committed their lives to and their vocations and efforts. And so my sister was the first to go, and she had a very successful time there. And then my brother, a little interesting.
What years was this?
Oh, God.
In the 50s, I gather. Or just ballpark.
I couldn't tell you. My dad had paid Vanderbilt tuition for 17 straight years because
back when you could afford to do that.
Well, yeah, that's right. It's all relative to the time and the cost, but that was he was written up in the Vanderbilt alumni paper as at that time, which was a number of years ago, having paid it's sort of a something to be proud of. And my sister, went on to get a master's degree in education, my oldest sister, Louise. And then my brother comes along and was a captain of the football team.
What was his name?
William L. Parker Jr., Bill Parker. and he was a lawyer here in Nashville for many
Sure,
years too.
okay.
And but what the story I remember as the kid is that he and Johnny Majors were invited to come to Georgia to interview and were being semi-recruited by Georgia. And the parents met, I think, in War Trace, where the train goes through. Johnny Majors was from Huntsville, I believe, and
He was.
and they went down.
Huntland.
Huntland, that's right,
Yeah.
Huntland, that's right, Huntland. And so Billy and Johnny went down without their parents to Athens, I guess, and then it came back, and a little while later, Billy got an offer of a scholarship to Georgia. Johnny Majors did not, and as you know, went to UT. But that's not the end of the story. My dad was so convinced that Vanderbilt was where he wanted his children to go, and I don't really know how it worked out, but my brother went to Vanderbilt, played football without a scholarship. He wasn't offered a scholarship at Vanderbilt for 2 years, and then got a scholarship, and played under Coach Art Gepp. And so that was something that our family was proud of.
Did he play football against Majors, or
He
was
did.
that too small a school for Shelbyville?
No. Thank you. It's a really good question, and I had forgotten this circumstance. But the last game of the season, they played UT his sophomore year. He was getting to play some. He tackled Johnny Majors on 3 consecutive plays. I was sitting in the stand and saw it, for a loss. I mean, I don't even remember who won the game, but I know because we were watching my brother the whole time. And after that game, he was called in and told that he was going to have a scholarship for the next year. So that was a big weekend.
So he played both ways.
He played
defense
both.
and
yes.
offense.
Oh yes. He did.
It just seems like such a thing of the past
Right,
to hear
right.
that. So what other activities did you have in high school other than athletics?
Honor Council, which that was it, pretty much. School and athletics, and academics.
Did you, and this is just something I thought of, did you overlap at all with Bill Russell, Judge Russell?
No.
He was from...
Yes. Oh yeah.
Okay.
Very close. His family and our family were very close. This was really the beginning of my freshman year in high school, but Joel Evans, Congressman Evans, was the congressman, and close friend with my father. My father served in the legislature for a term, the Tennessee legislature for a term, but the families were close, and so I was allowed to be a page in Washington, sort of between it may have been during my freshman year, but I was late getting to school.
Freshman of high school?
Yeah.
What an experience for someone from Shelbyville.
That's right, from a little town. Mr. Evans was powerful. He's on the Ways and Means Committee, and that's back when the seniority ruled, and he was such a great leader. And so, of course, I worked as a page, not in his office, So he wasn't the person organizing the pages. That's done by somebody in the, that's an employee of the House of Representatives. But he gave me that opportunity. And
well, you must have been 13 or 14. Did your parents just put you on a bus or a train?
I don't remember how that we got there, but I do remember that there was a home where the person there looked after the pages. I mean, we were responsible for getting to work and back, and they didn't monitor us, but was like a house mother, and slept on bunk beds, and the guy on the top bunk was from Boston, and being from Shelbyville, I had not really been exposed to the Boston accent, and I never got used to it while I was there.
What a great opportunity to meet people from all over the country.
It was.
Do you remember any of them, or?
No, a little too young.
Yeah,
In fact, it was work and then go spend the night and then go back and work, and it was just for about 6 weeks.
Okay.
It was not, a long-term
Did
deal.
this have any influence in your wanting to do public service or law, or just?
I was a political science major, and so yes, it had an impact. And certainly to watch the Congress. In fact, I was there when they had adjourned for the term, and there was hardly anybody there but the actual speaker, and a few pages and maybe one or two congressmen who were making speeches because there wasn't anybody there. But so to see how all of that worked was, and I came away impressed with, as I still am, with our government system.
So why Vanderbilt for undergraduate?
Well, I mentioned earlier that, and this is just what I surmise, but at least at the time I went to Vanderbilt, all my three older siblings had, one of them was still there, and I didn't know, quite frankly, that there was a choice or another school.
None of us did back in those days.
I don't know. It's not like they said you're going to Vanderbilt, and I'm saying I want to look around. It was like it never came up. If I could get in, then that's where you're going.
So you must have gone at about 61. Did you get out of high school?
That's right.
Okay. And this was an interesting time for Nashville. Do you remember, and this is a little diversion, we're going to come back to Vanderbilt, anything about the civil rights era at Vanderbilt? What were your impressions of that, or did it affect you?
It did. Stokely Carmichael came through while I was here. And
in undergraduate?
Yes.
Okay.
And the campus grill, I don't know whether you've ever heard that story or aware of it. There's a campus grill. Mr. Putman was the owner of that, and everybody at Vanderbilt, went there. But there weren't many African American students, and it was segregated. And I was a member of the Campus Christian Association, and we voted to boycott the campus grill. So, I remember.
What year do you think this was?
Probably my sophomore year.
Okay.
Could have been my junior year.
Yeah.
I only had 3 years in undergraduate school, and then I went on to law school. But probably my freshman or early sophomore year, and handing out the little bulletins that explained in a nice way. Mr. Putman was an avid Vanderbilt basketball, and because he had the campus grill right across the street from the library. There's an ice cream place there now, I think, and because of everybody knew that and liked what he served at the campus grill, and because he was such an avid sports fan and supported Vanderbilt sport, and had good seats on like the third row, and everybody kind of knew who he was. It was, you had to think through that. You're boycotting a place that you'd been, and
of a person you liked.
And a person you liked, and who was very supportive of Vanderbilt, and his position was, it's my restaurant, and I can serve if I want to. And so it crystallized, you had to think about what's right and what's wrong. And and then, so that as far as the civil rights movement, I'm trying to think of when Martin Luther King, the actual year that he was assassinated, but that
would have been about I was in the Army, so that would have been 68 or 69. 68 probably.
Okay. Okay. I was thinking it may be a little earlier than that because I think I was
might be
still
wrong.
at Vanderbilt, and I could be wrong about that. But I left law school in '67. So, but of course that occurred, and then JFK. I remember where I was
61.
when he was assassinated.
63.
Probably 63.
64 or 60, somewhere.
Right in there. And,
Yeah.
And then I happened to be watching TV when Bobby Kennedy was assassinated, actually. At least what you could see on TV. I saw it live at 11 o'clock at night.
Were you, what else did you do at Vanderbilt? What, were you in a fraternity?
I was a Sigma Chi, and
that would have been with Lamar and John Surgeon,
yeah.
who were quite the activists. Did they have any influence on the boycott? Because they would have been impressed. They would have been older than you, right?
Oh, yes. Lamar was a senior when I was a freshman.
Okay.
And Johnny was like a junior, Johnny Surgeon, your neighbor, when I was a freshman. And Johnny and Willie Hardison, I don't know what you know Willie, but they actually pledged me. My brother-in-law, Jim Ward, was president of the Sigma Chi chapter, and they pledged me before I got there. You know, I went to Vanderbilt without even having much discretion or choice involved, which was fine. And then I joined Sigma Chi because my sister married Jim Ward. And so, you know, my sister, and so I ended up with great people, great, I mean, Lamar and Johnny and Snake Grace, you remember him?
Oh, very well.
And John Ed Miller, great basketball players at Vanderbilt. Yeah, so it was a milk drinking fraternity. That's the reputation it had at the time. It changed.
Really?
Oh yeah, that's right. And of course that appealed to my parents. And
was Bobby Schwartz a Sigma Chi?
He sure was.
He was another basketball player. Keith Thomas was.
Keith was sometime after that.
But I'm trying to think of the Vanderbilt kind of basketball people.
Roger Schurig.
Uh-huh.
I think Roger never actually joined the fraternity, but just hung out there all the time.
Who else did you get to know at Vanderbilt who you continue to know in the legal or just general community?
Well, Jim Gooch and
was he Jim or James back then?
He was Jim to me. He's always been Jim. And Lee Smith. Lee Smith.
Very well.
That we were roommates during
the three of y'all.
During law school for 2 of those years. I married for my 3rd year.
And so you decided to go through in 3 years. What drove that decision? And I've interviewed other people who did the same thing, and not that it was any major decision. They just decided to do it. Paul Jennings was one.
Well, I knew that I had the Marine Corps for 3 years.
Why is that? Were you in Naval ROTC?
No, I was not. The Marine Corps had a program where you could sign up.
Platoon Leader School.
Yes, and when you graduated, you were commissioned. You did have to go to Officers Candidate School one summer for 12 weeks, but you were commissioned.
Who talked you into that, or what led you to that decision?
My brother had the same program, and my dad was a banker, and it was the best financial position you could, for anybody that was going to serve in the service. Financially, it was the best because under their program, if you were going to law school, you got credit for your time in grade, so you're commissioned when you graduate from undergraduate school, and then you have 3 years time in grade. And so by the time I got out of law school, not too long after that, you know, I was a first lieutenant when I got out, and then in a month or 2 I was a captain. And they allow you to go to law school.
Did they pay you?
No.
Okay.
but just your longevity pays and your rank pays when you serve your 3 years.
Did you meet your wife in undergrad?
I did.
When did y'all meet?
My freshman year. She was
And
in the same sorority as my sister.
You're a very predictable person,
I
or
know
your
it.
family. But I've gone through the same thing with my family in Vanderbilt too, although I went to Sewanee. So you just, I don't think we ever addressed why you went after 3 years.
Oh yes, you asked me. Well, to be candid, I was a milk drinker, and so fraternity life after 3 years was not, you know, where I wanted to spend my time. I had taken the courses to get a political science major and a philosophy minor, and I wanted to move on. And I think part of the answer was because I knew I had 3 years, even after law school, before I could start practicing.
Right.
So I think all of that put together caused me to say, hey, it would be good investment and of time and save a year.
Any memorable professors before we leave Vanderbilt? And the other question I want to get to, did you work in the summers other than not when you weren't at Quantico or wherever you, Paris Island?
Okay. Professor Smedley was one of my, he was a family law. And the summer before I was married.
Let's do undergrad first,
okay,
professors.
Okay, yeah. All right. Dr. Birkby was my political science professor and counseled me and was my advisor and was a great guy. And Dr. Mead was my, I took a philosophy graduate course. They allowed me to do that, and had with Dr. Mead, and there were like 8 graduate students and myself, and he was nice to me because, you know, I wasn't in the, I hadn't had all the courses, and you know, and so he told me, he said, I'm gonna grade you on a different scale, and so I did okay in that course. Aristotle was the name of the course.
You survived it.
I survived it, yeah. On the scale that he used for me, I did okay. I had really good professors. And then your other question was,
did you work in the summers other than the Marine training?
I believe it was the summer after my freshman year. Frank Woods, who just passed away, Larry Woods, his brother, and Judson Harwood, who was a Nashville guy, who was in law school, and wasn't in law school. He was all 3 of these. Larry was maybe a year behind me, or maybe, and Frank was 1 or 2 years ahead of me. But Frank is organized over several summers opportunities for employment at Libby, McNeil, and Libby's. It's now Libby's, but in the state of Washington to work in the pea harvest. So Frank and Larry and Judd and I drove straight through, switching up the driving, all the way from Nashville, Tennessee to Walla Walla, Washington, and reported the next day, had to join the union to work in the pea harvest there. Frank had gone to all the Tennessee Tech, Murfreesboro, Middle Tennessee State University, all the schools around in Middle Tennessee, and recruited people, because he'd been the year before and worked out a deal with them that if he could bring a large group of workers that just worked for that short season, then he could get the top job there, and which was making the brine. So he got Larry and Judd and me good jobs there. So that summer was totally dedicated to the pea harvest and the wheat harvest. I worked in the wheat harvest. They went on somewhere else and worked in another to another state. I had to come back from my sister's wedding. And then I worked for Eastern Airlines as a baggage claim adjuster, which means if you lose your bag or it's broken or something, then the Eastern office called me and said, go pick up the bag, talk to these people, get it fixed if you can. If you can't, try to settle it or get them a new bag.
What a great job. How did you get that?
Lionel Barrett had that job, and he was passing it on and passed it on to me.
One last question on Walla Walla. Did you stay at the YMCA and did you eat at the all-night Chinese restaurant ever?
No, I don't remember either one of those two. I do remember that it was like a Western city, and the taverns or bars, you know, you went through swinging doors, and then there was a bar there, and there were people playing cards over here. I mean, it was.
I'm a graduate of the program and still have my Libby's badge.
Are you really?
Yeah. Because you made so much money.
Did you go with Frank?
No, we drove all night from Sewanee, you know, and
fantastic.
And we made a fortune, but we worked from
12-hour shifts.
8 at night till 8 in the morning.
Yeah.
And got off, and this is your interview, not mine, but I can remember bleary-eyed getting off and getting beer, and we'd drink it on the porch and go to sleep about 10 o'clock. It was a great experience, and one everybody should get to do other than the military.
Right.
Those are two huge things. But you applied to law school, and that would have been in 64, 65.
Let's see, I graduated undergraduate in 65, it would be in 65.
Okay. And who were your friends in law school that are still around?
Okay.
And or perhaps have passed on, but you were close to.
Two other folks made the same decision that I did. That besides Gooch, I think Lee Smith had already graduated and was in the freshman class with us. Gooch did the senior absentia thing, and then John McCall and Bob Sims, both lawyers. I mean, worked after graduating from law school, were lawyers, both from Louisville. Bob passed away in the last year. Close friend, who was Sigma Chi, that was the same kind of experience that he was a milk drinker too. And then John McCall, as far as I know, is still practicing. And John, a few years later, got the largest jury verdict in favor, of the plaintiff. That was like $14 million, and
win $14 million meant something.
That's right. That's right. And I, a little bit lost touch with him, but.
Who are the professors you remembered at Vanderbilt?
Carl Warden, whose son practices law with us here in Nashville. I took a criminal law course and advanced seminar from him, and he was great. And I mentioned Professor Smedley, the contract teacher, who is I can't say his name right now, but had been there. It was an institution and a treasure, a treasure for the university and the law school. I'm sorry, I can't remember his name, but anybody that went back then would remember him.
And you went for 3 years to law school?
3 years to law school.
And what did you do during the summers?
I worked for the Pollock Company. One summer, I went to law school in the summer and worked for the Pollock Company, showing apartment houses and apartments in apartment houses. They had about 7 of them. Regency Park, on Woodlawn.
Is that David Pollock?
That's David. Did you know David?
I think he just recently died.
that could possibly
He
be.
was a real character. He lived on Wetland Avenue.
I know
Yeah.
he did. Yeah, I know that.
He
Kept
was-
his kids.
He was a great guy, but he was a fright. I mean, he just a mess.
If you know, you knew him. That's fantastic because he was kind of an important person in my life. He was very good to me, and the job he would assign the people that wanted to see the departments to me, and then I could sort of set it up when I could, you know, in the afternoons after morning classes or whatever. And then if you got the apartments all full, then I didn't have much to do, but I still got paid, you know.
It's a great job for law school.
Yeah, it was. And, you know, so I really tried to get to sell these apartments.
Well,
and they were pretty much full. And his wife was a lawyer.
Yeah, I was really fond of both of them, particularly David, because he was
I've got some fond memories.
He was a ride.
What else did,
And you decide to marry Adrian when?
I remember where we were when I decided, but maybe a year before we, you know, or almost a year before we got married.
So you married a girl from the big city.
Yeah, yeah. So she had another year. We're in the same class. She had another year in undergraduate school, and then I had my first year of law school. And then we talked about it and decided that we wanted to get married. And she worked for Kane Sloan's, which is no longer here, for that year. And that's probably the year I worked for the pilot company. And then we got married.
So after law school, you went into the Marines. Where did you start out there?
Okay, I started out at reporting. That's actually when the officers candidate school was. The other was boot camp before when I first signed up. To officers
at Paris Island, where was that?
That was at Quantico.
Okay.
It was Quantico. So then I went to officers. Adrian and I went to officers school. It wouldn't be candidate school. I mean, you could flunk out of this, but it made it through. You know, you had your obligation and your opportunity. That was in late '67, but right before that, from graduating from law school, before going into the service in 1967 and reporting for the officer school, I worked for Munir, Crouch, White, and Harrod, and for 6 months or something like that, and then I had 3 years on active duty in the Marine Corps.
And where were you stationed?
After officers candidate school, I was sent to Newport, Rhode Island, to the Naval Judge Advocate School. I was not a naval officer, but that's the school the Marine Corps uses. And I think it was like 8 weeks, and that was good duty. One of the special reasons it was good duty is because I was a captain before I got up there, right before I was promoted to captain. And you wore your uniforms to class, but after class, you wear anything you want to. And I was, trying to stay in shape, and everybody was, and so we'd play racquetball regularly. And somebody would be assigned to set it up and get the court time and so on, and about half the time, we couldn't get a court. Every time it was my time, I could get a court. And I don't know why. Well, I just had luck. These guys aren't trying hard enough, to call over there and be diligent. But it turned out that when they'd say, well, now who is this? And I said, it's Captain Parker. The captain in the Navy is a really high rank. And when you go over there, you didn't have your uniform on. And Captain Parker, well, thank you, you're on court 4. And I wasn't even aware of, that had anything to do with it. Going to the officers club, when you make your reservations, you say, it's Captain Parker and I've got a party of 4. We always got in easily. it wasn't until later, one time we had to wear our uniforms to the officers club, when I said, I don't think you all are at that table over there. You need to be over here, you know. And I said, it's fine, you know, one's okay with me. And then it started dawning on me and on my other Navy buddies, you know, that, hey, the reason you've had such good luck with all this.
I hope you didn't change your modus operandi.
Oh, no, I'm sure I didn't. I just answered the questions honestly. But that was one of the interesting aspects of that 8 weeks.
And then after there, where'd you go?
Went to 29 Palms, California, Marine Corps base, which is the largest military base, I think, in the world, but I know it is in the United States. And I'm talking about other countries too. It's an artillery base, and it's in the middle of the Mojave Desert.
I've driven through there.
Okay,
Yeah.
all right.
Was Adrienne with you at this point?
She was, and you probably weren't driving through there with the idea that I'm going to be here for
No,
a long time.
we just saw the signs to it.
Yeah, if you drive through there with for the first time with the knowledge that you're going to be there a long time, tears could have come down your way, and did for mine, because it's flat and sand and
Hot.
But it turned out to be a really good duty station. And
How long were you there?
19 months, and then went to Vietnam.
And where were you in Vietnam? Da Nang?
North of Da Nang, in I Corps, at Force Logistics Command. It was probably 20 miles north of Da Nang. It was its own command. And
What kind of cases did you hear there?
Some serious ones and some not so serious. AOL, you wouldn't think there'd be that many AOL cases, but there were a few of those. Disrespect, you know, having an armed weapon and telling an officer that you're not going to do what they say. And the most significant one was, well, two really. The charge that someone was shooting mortars on a beach where there was a woman and 2 kids and no real threat. Yeah, you know, that type of thing.
Did they kill them?
One of the children was killed, and so you see the bad side of war and those type of operations, but the worst one, the really terrible one, was 2 of enlisted guys were their cards for getting into the enlisted person's club for beer drinking and music and so on were pulled because of some infraction. I don't know what that was. And they, it was alleged, got a 3rd person drunk and, or drugs, you know, and came over and threw hand grenades. Fragged them, yeah. In over the, you know, which was jam-packed because there was a performance of some type going on. And it was, I think 13 Marines were seriously wounded, maybe one killed, and 2, I don't remember whether they lived or not, but there were 3 seriously injured, 1 killed, and like 13. And so that, you know, our legal office had to handle that.
They were convicted.
Interestingly enough, 2 of them pled guilty to sort of being a accomplice, yeah. But they said the other guy's the one that threw them. They sure wouldn't have thrown them, you know, but they, and he wasn't, those 2 didn't have a very good record, and the other person did, and so they received their punishment or sentence, and then they had a big trial involving the person who had a good record, but the evidence looked like he, or it was alleged that he did that. And to the Marine Corps' credit, he had a civilian lawyer come over with a Marine Corps lawyer to defend him, and got all the rights and privileges of a full defense, and had a board of 5 officers, and they found him guilty of the same thing the others were, not of the if he'd been guilty of the capital offense, then.
So he didn't go to jail?
Oh yes.
Did he go to Portsmouth? Where did he go?
I don't know. I don't know.
I
He didn't stay over there. He was,
yeah.
And so, you know, I was impressed that those, some of them career officers, some of them not, were willing to not convict him of the capital crime.
What a fascinating experience. So you went there from there to Judge Phillips, is that right?
I went, and in
And
fact,
how did you end up there? Was that, I know back in the day, he was a Nashville and Adrian was a Nashville. And was there a connection there?
No, no. The connection was after my 19 months, and I got orders overseas. I got orders overseas as a military judge, but I hadn't been to military judge school, only judge. So they sent me to Charlottesville for 7 weeks before I went for that. During that time here in Nashville, and before I went to Charlottesville, and coming back here before I went to report for Vietnam, I knew I wanted a job, and I only had 9 months left in my service. So I applied with Judge Phillips, and the dear person he was, I think he was impressed more with the fact I'm going to Vietnam than he was with my legal resume, which, you know, was okay, but it, you know, it probably, you probably wouldn't have hired me, George, to be your clerk. You maybe you would, but anyway, I think he felt, I don't know this, but felt like, hey, he's going to Vietnam. He gave me the job right there.
He was a wonderful person.
Absolutely, he was.
And who were the other co-clerks?
Jack Waddy and I were co-clerks.
Okay.
And
that's how you got to know Jack. Had you known him before? Or he went to Georgetown.
Yeah, he went to Georgetown,
okay.
right. Yeah. I hadn't known him, but it was a privilege to get to know him, and so, you know, we were both starting out.
Yeah. He is legendary, but, you know, too many people have forgotten who he was. Talk a little bit about what he was like to clerk for. He was a total gentleman, I know that, but also I always heard that you couldn't write more than 5 pages on a brief or things like that.
You know, let's see. Okay, I can tell you, you learn something with every great experience that you have, and you can't always boil it down to 1, 2 things. But one thing I can boil down is, I also mentioned what a great guy he is. He knew I had to tell him, I'm not a great typist. I'm going to be writing out, and I'll do it leisurely, Judge. But I'm not.
That's right.
Yeah.
You had to type.
Yeah. And so.
Did his secretary refuse to type it, or he just said you had to do it? I've heard that tale too, and I can't.
I think it's the former.
Yeah, I think it is too.
She was great to us. She mothered us, but and you know, but on those kind of issues, she ruled.
She only typed for him then.
That's right. She didn't. She wouldn't type for us. The question. Oh, Judge Phillips, the judge. So the first case he assigns me, you know, you do the facts, summarize the facts, and you didn't 5 pages. I don't remember that exact rule, but for whatever reason, you knew you didn't want to have a lot of pages, just important stuff, you know, and then the issue, and then the law, and then a possible resolution, and it's the same way on after he heard a case and we got to sit in and listen to it be argued, and then if it got assigned to him, then he would assign it to us, and we heard the argument, read the briefs, written the pre-hearing memo, And so, you know, we were as prepared as anybody, not the competence, but but preparation to, you know, to write an opinion. And he wanted it written exactly in the form of an opinion that he would like to write, and with some rules about put the issue up front so the lawyer doesn't have to read the whole case and so on. And so the first one, he gave me opinion that he gave me to write a draft of whatever I thought. And, you know, and I would say, well, Judge, what do you think? And that's not what I'm asking. I'm asking you to do this, literally. And I remember I hadn't been able, you know, the first one, and I go in, I get to a point now, you could go this way under the law or you could go that way under the law. And if you do, then it's going to take you down this trail, and if you go the other way, it's going to take, it's clear, it's one of those two. I better ask him before I spend, you know, a day and a half doing that. I went in and he said, Bob, I want you to do all of this yourself, and even when you get down to the bottom, you know, you write my name, you know, whatever. And he said, that's what I'm asking you to do, is to do that. That doesn't mean that he's going to agree with you, or he's not. But he wants you to. And so then you get the treat of coming back and saying, well, here's the opinion. And he might say, no, I want it to come out another way. The final result, I want it to be another way. You go, and I said, okay, I'll do that, because you thought about that, but you just had to select one. And, you know, sometimes so that's very good, you know, and he might make changes. But so, and that's what I've told the young lawyers that come to the office, and you ask them, sign them on a project or an assignment. Go do it the best you possibly can, with thinking of all aspects of it, and then come back with your recommendation. And that's the way you learn, you know.
Such an invaluable experience, which you don't learn in law school, to be concise, to be simple, get to the point, and reach a decision. And, you know, quite frankly, I learned that from Keith London, who was taught it by Judge Phillips. And, you know, that was after a couple of years of practice. So, I mean, what that experience is just beyond, you know, cost. It's really, what a fortunate thing. And also to get to know Jack Waddy, too. So.
Oh, yeah.
So after that, where did you go?
After I went to Goodpasture, Carpenter, Woods, and Sasser.
In the American Trust Building.
In the American Trust Building. And Frank Gerwoda had just been appointed to the Chancery bench, and they had an opening. And that's where I went.
What was it like going, having been with an insurance defense firm, from Judge Phillips and the weighty matters that he decided, to Goodpasture, where I assume you were doing sub-row work over in General Sessions Court? Is that an accurate assessment, or?
Well, not necessarily sub-row work, but doing small claims, liability claims, premises liability, and all kinds of small. Of course, their law firm did a lot of big things and other things, but you're right. I started out. You want me to tell you about my first case?
Yeah, no, that's more invaluable experience in the General Sessions Court than anything.
Everything you do, you learn. And so my first case was for a furniture company on Broadway that's not there anymore, one of the clients of the law firm. And the facts were that a customer had purchased a set of furniture, you know, living room, I think, maybe, if I remember, you know, 6 or 8 pieces of furniture, and put it on layaway. And that was the agreement, and that was fine. And I think it was like 10 months later, they'd paid for it. And the furniture company packed it all up and took it to their house, and was, you know, with agreement, or calling or letting them know they're going to be delivering it, and they started unloading it, and they got about halfway through unloading it, and the lady the customer said, "That's not the furniture I bought. I don't want that furniture. Get it out of here." And they didn't know what to do, but they ultimately said, "Well, we can't just force it in our house." So packed it all up, brought it back, and they had the money for it, and they had the the furniture, and they didn't know what to do. But what do they need to do? They've done all their part of it, and so Ben Roskin, I believe there was a Ben Roskin who did all general sessions cases, was the attorney that sued the furniture company in general sessions court for $450, I think. And so that's the first case that Mr. Carpenter brought in and said, "Bob, you just handle this from the beginning." And I said, "Great, man, police appreciate the confidence." And so I talked to Mr. McRae, who was actually the salesman, been there the whole time, sort of the manager of the store. And he remembered all of that, everything I said was undisputed from his standpoint. Just as a, what do you do? We stored it for 10 months and we sold it for a good price. And so I start working on that case, and I'm thinking, man, that's a pretty good case to start with. We've done everything we possibly could. And so it comes to trial.
I see a loss here.
Yeah, you learn from losses.
Yeah.
But it's okay. So go to court with Justice Birch on the bench.
Yeah.
He was a general sessions judge at the
Yeah.
time. And it was set about 2 or 3 days later. And I said, the only problem I see, Mr. McRae, is that I think the judge is likely to say that that woman certainly knows what furniture she bought and what she wanted in her home. And if she says under oath it's not the furniture, I'm not sure, I'm not sure, what's going to happen here, even though I know you're a reputable person and all that. So I'm worried about it, thinking I'm going to lose that first case. And more than likely, Mr. McRae versus this homeowner.
Yeah.
And so I thought, golly, how can you prove this was, over a year since the furniture sale. And so I got pictures of the furniture and so on. And so I'm thinking, how are we going to do that? And I'm talking to another lawyer in the office and come up with the idea, well, maybe it was advertised in the paper. Maybe that's how, she didn't just walk in the store. So I called Mr. McRae, and he said, yeah, that was on sale. Yeah, we possibly could have put that in the paper. And I said, well, let me check. And I had 2 days to do it, so I went down to Tennessee, and sure enough, that furniture and a picture of all of it was right there, and the price and everything. So I got it, and I was like, boy, the judge.
Slam dunk here.
Yeah, slam dunk's what I'm thinking. But I got to do it just right, So she got on the stand, and attractive lady, she's a nurse, and she's wearing this pressed white uniform. I mean, she hadn't been to work that day because, there was not a wrinkle in it. And she testified to what Mr. Roskin asked her, that they bought the wrong furniture out there. And I said, well, then I asked her about, how she says, I don't really remember. I said, was it possible you saw it in the paper? Was it an advertisement? No, it was yeah, that's right. I saw it in the paper. So I thought, I've got it now. So I then bring out the paper, and I said, well, this is the date. Yeah, that's the date. It's on the invoice and everything. And here's the pictures that I took of the furniture that they've got holding for you, and here's the other. Would you look at that and see if you see any difference whatsoever? And there was. She didn't answer. She just broke down crying. Absolutely. The courtroom was packed, and I thought, man, this is Perry Mason. And so the judge, Birch, just says, we'll take a 10-minute recess. So they go, I said, well, and she's going to gather herself. Yeah. I don't know what she can say, She could come in and say, no, they're not the same, but that would be perjury probably. And so she comes back and the judge says, do you want to take the stand again? No, she doesn't even want to take the stand. And I said, you know, I don't have any more questions and no more defense. No. And so the judge sits up there for a minute or two. Judgment for $450 against the furniture company. I was 180 degrees what I was expecting. And so, and I thank everybody else in the courtroom too, because it was clear that the evidence had been admitted. I had them all admitted, you know, before arrested. And so I'm walking out the door of the general session and walking down the hall, and it's Mr. Parker, Mr. Parker. And I turn around and it's Judge Birch. And he said, you look like you were really taken aback by my, I said, yes, sir, I was. I thought we had proven that we delivered the right furniture. And he says, well, I know that, but I can't let you keep the money and the furniture too. And that idea never even crossed my mind. And I can't say that I ever agreed with the judgment, but I appreciated him coming out and telling me, you know, what he was thinking, because I learned from that. And I learned that even if you got an absolute airtight lock on the facts and how you would think they would logically come out, if the judge Payne doesn't want to do that.
I took a law book to General Sessions on my first case and was laughed out of the courtroom, and George McGugan taught me an invaluable lesson on a car case down in Gallatin. So, you know, you learn great things from General Sessions that you don't learn otherwise. We're going to have to push on here. Tell me about some other cases that stick out in your mind that you find particularly memorable.
The bottom line on the last case for me was, before every case, no matter how sure I was I had the facts, I had to also determine whether a human being would want it to come out that way. And if you've got both of those, you're in good shape. But you got to have, most of the time, both of them. That's my teaching.
And I suspect if you went back to Mr. Goodpasture or whoever it was, didn't faze them in the least. No, they probably thought it was pretty funny.
Yeah. Well, I've admitted that story before, and but I learned from that in a way you couldn't learn it any other way. I had another case one time with some lawyers you know here, and Judge Morton was the judge, a federal judge, and it was a big case for a big insurance company who spent a lot of time and a lot of money marshaling facts. It was a excess liability insurance policy that this great big insurance company had issued for a small insurance company here in Nashville that was based here. And the way that works is, we get into this, but then if our claims, valid claims, are more than what we have planned for, we got insurance. The big insurance company comes in, of course they pay a big premium for it. And so that's what I think excess liability insurance is what it's called for insurance companies. And they'd gotten into this situation where it was several $1 million more than what they could pay for. But what they're supposed to do is to borrow the money and, you know, pay the interest on it until they make their claim and they get their money, and then they pay off and cut down on the interest and so on. They don't. They have to actually pay the claims. And so by paying the claims, you issue the check. And so the case boiled down to all these things about proof, witnesses about what that type of insurance does, and so on and so on. But it kept getting simpler to me that they've got to pay the check. And we finally got a copy of the policy that actually had the word issued in it. They only insure against issuance of checks that are more than the company can handle, and the company has to, provide for interim financing to do that until they get their claim and can be audited and everything. And so I'm out at the school where one of my children attended, waiting on a teacher's conference, and I was sitting in the library, and I looked around, and there were about 15 dictionaries, all in a row, different dictionaries. And I said, issued. It says they got to issue it. So I looked up, and each of the had 30 minutes, and wrote down. Some of them were the same, but there were different words and series of words that describe what issuance meant. But every one of them seemed to include you let go of, okay? And so I thought, well, we'll look into that. So we asked Judge Morton to order to require them to hold on to all the documents they had, and to allow our person to go in and audit and look and see. Well, to make a long story short, when they did that, they found that there was something to the word issue, that it looked like in this office that they had issued all the checks because they weren't there. They written and typed and mailed, postage and all that, but they weren't sure. And so we asked, where did you drop them in the mail? Well, we turned them over to our another company for mailing, and then we looked further, and that company is right down the hall with a different name and a different incorporation, and so they stamp the envelopes and everything, and take them down the next door and put them there, store them there, and so we asked to see that, and it turns out that the same people were the incorporators of both, and so we asked to look to see what was in there, and however much they'd sued for, that's how much was over there when it was audited. And so the plaintiffs put on their case, and then we put on our case and moved to, for a directed verdict. Mm-hmm. And to this day, after we finished, Judge Morton didn't say anything. He said, "Y'all stay here. I'll be back here in a minute." I didn't know if he was going to the restroom or what it was. He came back in about 10 minutes and said, "I got a dictionary in my office too. And issued, you have to let go of it. You have to let go of control of it." Case dismissed. And we had witnesses from everywhere, and
he was so smart to me, and he made people be so prepared. I love Judge Morton.
Yeah.
Now, he was controversial with a lot of people, but I just thought he did a great job of
he tried to do what was right, George.
And he trained the Nashville legal community to be better lawyers, I think.
Mm-hmm.
There was a lot of slacking, but he really made people toe the line. What other judges or lawyers do you, when you think about over your career?
Judge Swigert, I really appreciated. He was like Judge Morton. Whether they're right or wrong, I always felt their goal was for justice to come out of their court, and not anything else. I'm up here, and I'm going to make a decision in this case, and I always felt comfortable that they did exactly what they felt was right. I could say bankruptcy court, but I wasn't in your court more than one or two times for something so minor that I don't even remember what it was.
Did you ever make the mistake of not saying your name before Judge Swigert? He would get that smirk on his face and go, "I can't hear you." Do you remember that?
Somewhat. I more remember having his magnifying glass up there, and if you introduced a photograph, you're going on with the case and the witnesses, and he's over there. And then Judge Morton would give you a continuance if you were sick or wanted, or a vacation. Those were the only two. Otherwise, you didn't know you had to be ready. And he didn't continue cases to the day before.
Did you know that his courtroom deputy would continue cases?
No, I hadn't heard that.
I found that out, and she would just push them off for you.
Oh, you mean for vacations or for, yeah.
No, well, if she knew you.
Uh-huh.
You know.
No, I didn't know her that well, I guess.
Yeah, well, I found out somehow, and I was always very nice to her.
Yeah.
So Morton would have killed me if he had known that. So
But she would just,
she would and tell Morton that, that jury pool or something like that. I didn't ask, and I just thought, it's pretty good.
My cases with Judge Morton, even if you'd have a good ground for continuance, he wouldn't act on it.
He wouldn't do it.
He wouldn't act on it until the day before.
Yeah.
And so you had to get ready and so on. But you settled some of them in the interim there on the basis that we're going to have to go to trial, so we better do this.
What other judges do you remember, particularly that?
Judge Phillips goes back a long way.
Ooh, Sam Phelps.
Yeah. Well, some of our present judges.
He could be a prickly character. Sam
Yeah,
Phelps.
he was prickly, and he ended up going to California to stay as a administrative judge or something. But he was one of the real active judges. When I first started and tried a lot of cases before him. Judge Trimble, Chancellor Trimble, I remember I went into his office one time with a minor settlement, and he read everything, and everything was in order except I had added something. The kid was 17 or 17 and a half, certainly old enough to, and a bright kid and so on. And it was something that affected him. So I, had his parents sign, his guardian, but then I also put his name and that I understand this and I think this is in my best interest and so on there. He rejected it. I don't know I think he just ended up crossing it out, but he said, Mr. Parker, certainly you know that if you're not of majority age, that whatever you say is not something I can consider. So
makes sense to me. What about other lawyers who you enjoyed practicing with, practicing against? Who sticks out as being someone who, if you
John Connors.
Oh, wonderful guy.
Yeah. I tried a case 3 times with him. I was defending, and he was on the plaintiff's side. And the first case, and he was someone all defense lawyers feared.
Yeah.
He could endear himself to the jury, you know.
He was a defense lawyer too.
He was originally.
Ways,
yeah. And so basically I had fear for him more than anything else, and respect for his approach to the, polling the jury, and not polling the jury, but vardying the jury. So I tried a case with him, and at the end of the case, the first trial, it ended because I didn't put on any proof, because I didn't think they had, the real source of the information would be coming from my client, and who was the driver who had hit somebody and they lost their legs. Whether my driver was at fault, obviously, and he had a bad record, and so on. And the plaintiff never saw him, so couldn't really testify. So, and he didn't call my guy, and so I didn't put on any evidence. I just, Judge, I don't think they've made a case, and moved for directed verdict. And Judge Lester was the judge, and he said, well, I'm going to think about this. and this was right about noon, and so I'm not going to decide it right now, and y'all come back this afternoon. And he had just won re-election, and John was his campaign manager or treasurer, I'm not sure which. And so respected both of them, but it was a tough case, and you really hadn't heard from the defense. But I got a letter from John Connors. Somebody brought it over. It's a little letter and said, "Good move. I'm non-suiting when we go back." And he non-suited. And then we tried it again, and I got a jury verdict. And Judge Lester set it aside. And we go back the third time, and John settles it for his medical expenses, which were not insignificant.
Yeah.
But basically, do you want to know what happened, or is this going too long?
No, it just.
Well, what happened was, it's an interesting case. The guy was on West End, the plaintiff was on West End, putting up a sign, these big letters.
Yeah.
And he's over there, it's about 17th Avenue or something like that, and he's putting up these letters, and he drops one, and the wind blows it across West End, or Broadway, and I guess it'd be West End out there, blows it across. The light is when he hits the alley, the pedestrian walkway, he's running, and the light is, the cars are stopped. And this guy runs all the way across, and there's the right-hand lane, curb lane, there's one or two cars stopped there. And he runs over there and picks up the letter, and without doing anything else, looking or anything, and the light had changed as he was coming to green for my guy. And he picks it up and runs back, and he comes out. Of course, the car that was stopped there saw him turn around and come back, but my guy didn't. He was just coming down the road. So he comes out, just from my guy's standpoint, he didn't know he was going to be coming back. He saw him running across, but why would he be thinking he's coming back? And so that was the argument on both sides, that maybe my guy was going too fast, or should have, since the other car didn't start up immediately, and back and forth. But really, that was a case where my guy had a bad record, driving record and so on, but there was no proof that he had done anything that you and I might not do, And it was unusual what the other guy was doing. His mind wasn't on looking or the light. He was wanting to get back over there.
As much as I'm enjoying this, we're going to have to wrap this up.
Okay.
But let's talk briefly about, you practice with some storied lawyers before storied judges. What are your thoughts, kind of on the legal profession and how you want to be remembered? Which is a hard thing to answer, but just you're a mature lawyer.
Honest, steady or stable, and reliable. That's about all I can claim anybody could, if they're asking about my legal career. They might say that, and that would please me if they did. But I don't really claim any other major accomplishments other than 48 years and still practicing. You limited it to the legal profession, and so that would be my sort of insignificant response to that.
I can say, respected, successful, a senior member of the bar who's well liked by everybody.
Well, I hope so.
That's a more than fair statement, and I would have to make this. And although I said we were wrapping it up, how come neither of your children became lawyers? And I know your son Morgan is not only a wonderful tennis player, but a superb ophthalmologist.
Well, thank you. I appreciate
And I
it.
don't know your daughter, but I'm sure she's
Adrian,
equally as nice.
Adrian is an engineer, electrical engineer, went to Dartmouth, not Vanderbilt. Morgan ended up coming back from Cornell and spending the last 2 years at Vanderbilt and played tennis on the tennis team and went to medical school at Vanderbilt and then the University of Michigan. But Adrian went to Dartmouth and got her teaching certificate and an engineering degree, and then wanted to travel. And she got a job with Audi in Germany and worked for 11 years there. And then she worked for Peugeot in Versailles, France for 3 years. And she's presently with Opel in Wiesbaden, Germany, and has been there a year and a half. And travels, speaks 4 languages fluently. How either one of my kids got to where they are, I don't know.
That's not surprising, and I'd be remiss if I didn't mention your wife, who had a very successful teaching career.
Well, she did. She was actually a creative designer and publications director, as opposed to a classroom teacher. But we now have she does pressed glass with a kiln, and has a studio in a rough studio in our rough basement, and people come and she's teaching now more than she really was before, the skill of pressing glass, slumping glass, and she's a happy person, and she had 26 years at Innsworth
but highly respected, just like the way
thank
you
you.
are too.
Thank
So,
you.